Good evening. Good evening. I'm John Miko, the president of Founding Forward, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to tonight's Liberty Series program. We're very glad you're here with us. It certainly will be a very topical and also historic topic tonight. We appreciate your attendance at these and all of our events. As you know, Founding Forward is the charity of the Union League of Philadelphia, and our mission is to create better citizen leaders, not just here in the Philadelphia region, but across the country. I was in Dallas, Texas the last couple of days for the George Washington celebration of the Dallas chapter, where 150 supporters of Founding Forward both celebrated Washington and raised money to send teachers and students to our programs. There are programs like that happening right now in San Diego and across the country to our 20 chapters and partners. We have a group coming in today for a 4-day program at our Valley Forge campus. They are high school students at our Spirit of America program. And this is really the busiest time of year for us, which is a wonderful time of year for us. And all of this happens only through voluntary support from you, from our members. So thank you for your support. We look forward to more of it because we need more of it to do the great work that we endeavor to do. So I thank you for that. A few housekeeping items. First of all, if you take a moment to please silence your cell phones. While you do that, I will let you know that we have 2 upcoming programs. We have a lot of upcoming programs. I'll mention just the next 2. This coming Monday, March 3rd, we have a Liberty Series, More People, More Innovation, More Liberty with Marian Toupe. It should be a very interesting program. And then Monday, March 10th, Civil War Roundtable, The Lincoln Miracle, the 1860 Convention that Changed History with Edward Acorn. So we look forward to seeing you at those programs as well. For our lawyers in the room, we do have CLE credit. You have to come up after the program and fill out your form here. Please feel free to do so. For Q&A today, we will do Q&A by microphone. Please use the microphone as we are streaming and videotaping the program. So please use the microphone. And as always, please keep it to a couple of sentences. And if you can't put a question mark at the end of that, you have failed. And Patrick is on a very short leash. If you go too long, we're just going to move on. So I thank you for your attention to that. And now it's my pleasure to introduce one of the great leaders of Founding Forward and the Union League, the chair of the Education Committee, who will introduce our program, Mr. Steve Targett. Steve.
Well, good evening, everybody. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Paul Carrese, who's a professor in the School of Civic and Economic Thought and Leadership at Arizona State University, serving as founding director from 2016 to 2023. While a professor at the U.S. Air Force Academy, he co-founded its honors program, blending liberal arts and leadership education. He teaches and publishes on American constitutional and political thought, civic education, and American grand strategy. As a Rhodes Scholar, he studied at Oxford University, completing degrees in theology and politics and philosophy. He co-led Educating for American Democracy on K-12 history and civics education, and is a senior fellow for civic thought and leadership at the Jack Miller Center for Teaching America's Founding Principles in History. In 2025, he will be a visiting scholar at the Hoover Institution, Stanford University, and is finishing a book on civic education, Teaching America, Reflective Patriotism in Schools, College, and Culture. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Dr. Paul Carrese.
Thank you for that kind introduction. My wife wouldn't believe most of it, so it's good she's not here. Delighted to see all of you here interested in this topic. I hope by the time I finish my remarks and we get to questions, you're more interested in the topic. I'm going to begin with America and the state of American civic education and slowly move toward talking about patriotism and Tocqueville's idea of patriotism. I'm grateful to the Jack Miller Center, who first introduced me to the Union League. It's always a great delight to be here working with Founding Forward and be in the Union League building. And I snuck away a few minutes ago to up to the second floor to the massive equestrian portrait of George Washington. I'm a George Washington fan. I just wanted to stand there for a moment and absorb it. So my talk is going to begin on a somewhat sober note about the state of American civic culture and the state of civics today. The election was momentous. The 24 election was momentous, but in some ways has not changed an underlying set of realities and concerns about our polarization, our anger, a civic discourse which features extreme voices, I think, the angry voices being most dominant. It might get better, but polarization has been a topic in academic literature and in public discussion for well over a decade now and doesn't seem to be getting better. Distrust of American institutions, distrust of anybody of divergent political views, and the voice in the middle not being as strong or prominent as it has been at other moments in our history. So the basis of this is in part, I'll argue, a kind of civic ignorance, a decline in the importance of the status and priority for civic education among citizens and aspiring citizens. H.L. Mencken is a controversial figure, wrote some pretty crazy things about America and about democracy, but when things are bleak, I hear this quotation from him in my head, and especially I think in the past 15 years in which a kind of small d democracy has been dominant in our politics. And I would define two figures as prominent there. Senator Sanders from Vermont and President Trump, Mr. Trump, President Trump, right? Angry populists. And that's the return to the spirit of Andrew Jackson, the democratic movement in America. H.L. Mencken's comment when things are ugly in that spirit of democracy comes to mind. Democracy is the theory that the common people know what they want and they deserve to get it good and hard. So it can be a rough ride. The situation in civic education, many of us probably know the classic Western movie, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. I'm going to focus on the bad and the ugly and then talk about some good things that are happening. In the K-12 space, in particular, I'm drawing on some recent reports by the Fordham Institute about K-12 standards and attempting to meet the standards for civic education. A report that I was involved in co-authoring, Educating for American Democracy, was released in 2021. The Association of, somebody help me, ACTA, Association for College Trustees and Alumni, right? Does a study every few years about higher education requirements for civic education, anything U.S. history requirements, U.S. government requirements. So I'm drawing on those kinds of sources. And in the K-12 space, the story of the past 50 plus years has been declining priority for, declining support for U.S. civics and history education in K-12 schools. In some ways, you could trace this to the Sputnik moment of the Cold War in 1957, that a premium was placed on technological study, what we now call STEM. This was crucial for American national security. And then as the Cold War continued into the 1980s, anything related to economic development became similarly important. In the 1980s, the concern is that America had rebuilt our enemies from the Second World War. We had rebuilt Japan's economy, West Germany, South Korea had been rebuilt, and then they were competing against us. So between those, in that 30, 40-year movement, we took for granted that from K through 12 and into higher education, everything was okay with teaching citizens about being citizens. And the disciplines of political science and history and other disciplines would be doing just fine work in higher education and supporting K-12 education, when in fact, with each increasing decade, the story got worse and worse. Not a priority, no requirement for testing in K-12, and if it isn't tested, it's not really taught. There were a movement across those decades, especially from the 1980s into the 1990s onward, to have national testing in reading and language arts, in math, in the sciences. The NAEP that is referred to on the slides, the National Assessment for Educational Progress, started in the 1990s, does include, so it's a U.S. Education Department initiative, but required by U.S. statute. They do have tests for U.S. history and for U.S. civics, which are supposed to be administered to 4th grade students, 8th grade students, and 12th grade students across the country, sort of like a random sample. The tests for math and for reading and language arts and for various science subjects, those are tested on a very regular schedule, 4th graders, 8th graders, 12th graders. The civics and history tests are supposed to be for 4th graders, 8th graders, 12th graders. Guess what I'm going to tell you, right? It's such a low priority, we don't even test for 4th graders and 12th graders anymore. We haven't done it for 15 or more years. We don't bother. There isn't the money. There isn't the, manpower in the group under the education department that's doing all this. So we only have data on the scores for 8th graders, and they're not good. Surprise, surprise, right? So 2/3 of the students in these tests are not really proficient in their understanding of U.S. history and U.S. civics, civic knowledge, of the kind you would expect in passing the naturalization test for new citizens. Right? And 1/4 of the students are not even at the basic, and the basic level is pretty low. But again, we only know it for about 8th graders because we don't even bother to test the 4th graders and the 12th graders. So in the higher education sector, maybe we should just all go to the bar at this point. We can call it quits if you want. We tried. So mostly nothing is required. There are exceptions that prove every rule. Mostly nothing is required at public universities, private universities, colleges. But as much of a presence as nothing is what I would call candidly an anti-civics. To criticize America, or to say that the important way to understand politics is in a global way, a cosmopolitan way. Again, there are exceptions, and I'm going to talk about some more hopeful green shoots coming up and some more hopeful activities. But if you put these two together, of course, they fit, right? If across let's say, even a 75-year cycle, there's less of a priority in higher education because professors like myself, political science professors, history professors, we have more important things to do. We have serious research to do. We can't be bothered with this civics thing. And it's skepticism. Civics is like some kind of indoctrination, and we're supposed to be free and skeptical. So if that's the situation in universities and then in doctoral programs producing the new professors, and obviously the vast, vast majority of school teachers, private and public school teachers, are graduates of universities, then it's of declining status and priority, support, money, time, et cetera, in K-12. Right? So that's the cycle, the downward spiral we've been in for probably 75 years. I was at a conference, a small workshop really at the Department of Defense earlier this week. There are people in the Department of Defense worried about the weakening American civic culture, weakening national cohesion, weakening national morale. Civic resilience is the fancy term for it. To the point where there's a strategic assessment office in the Pentagon that is thinking, it was just an exploratory workshop we had, thinking of undertaking a multi-year project about the connection between weak civic culture, weak civic resilience, and poor civic education and national security vulnerability. That our enemies know this, and we are not coming to grips with it. And I'm hopeful that they will undertake a study of this kind. The Department of Defense folks, I taught at the Air Force Academy as an Athenian in Sparta for 18 years. I know they're very concerned, the culture of the department, very concerned about being nonpartisan, non-political. So these are testy, contentious, polarized topics. What civic education should be, what you think about America, is American civic resilience a good thing, right? If you ask a group of professors, it'd be interesting to hear what they say about that. So a white paper was produced as a topic for discussion, and the opening gambit of the white paper was to talk about a Frenchman who witnessed the collapse of France in 1940. He's an academic, a writer, and joined the French resistance himself. It was caught in 1944 by the Nazis and was executed. But the manuscript that he wrote in 1940 survived. It was published after the Second World War as Strange Defeat. And it's still given the date, 1940. And the main cause, this is Mark Bloch, the main cause is a civic collapse. And the main cause of that was a failure of civic education. The national leadership and national culture of France had not committed itself to dealing with their divisions, really that go back to the French Revolution in 1789. And it was a house of cards waiting to be, waiting to collapse. And then the threat came from Germany, and they just couldn't fight. There was not a national culture and a national resilience. So this is the headline from the New York Post in June of 1940. This was under discussion at the Department of Defense earlier this week. A small set of us invited from the outside, but as a rationale for saying we could have a real problem on our hands in America in the 21st century if there was a national calamity, a national crisis of some kind. It's at least a topic worth thinking about should we devote time and resources to studying it. So, is there any ground for optimism? I don't think so. Is there ground for hope? There might be ground for hope, which takes hard work, right? There is a national renewal of civics underway in higher education. It's been underway in the past decade. The Jack Miller Center is an important national player in that. I'm glad to be part of the effort. The first part of the reform or renewal that I'm going to talk about is in the public universities. So as the introduction mentioned, I've been at Arizona State University since 2016, was asked to found a department. An extraordinary thing happened in 2016. I was up at the Air Force Academy in Colorado, and the state legislature and the governor decided this was a real problem at this massive state university in the state capital, largest university in the country. There wasn't really an option for students to study American civics in a higher education sort of way. And so they mandated and funded a new department with this big long name, the School of Civic and Economic Thought and Leadership. And fortunately, the president of the university was the kind of person who had made his brand at ASU with innovation, doing things that hadn't been done or hadn't been done recently. And he's also a patriot. He grew up in a military family. And so Michael Carrese said, yeah, we'll do it. We'll do it our way, which meant Michael's way. But we built it, and I was recruited to be the first department head. That has now spread to a total of 8 states and to 13 public university campuses in one form or another. The big version is that in 2 places there are colleges. The School of Civic Leadership at University of Texas, Austin, and at University of Florida in Gainesville. It's still called the Hamilton Center, the Hamilton Center for Classical and Civic Education. It's already been authorized by the state legislature and the governor to be the Hamilton School, meaning the Hamilton College, with a dean. About 5 or 6 others are department-sized. We have the name school, but we're a department. And the secret sauce here with the college and department-sized entities is they are tenure homes, which is the holy grail for universities and colleges. They are tenure homes for professors with control of their own curriculum and degrees as much as any department, as much as the physics department and engineering departments and whatever have control. These departments have control, and then if a college, they have more. Their own degrees, their own curriculum, their own hiring processes, again, supervised by colleges and provosts up the chain. So when I stepped down, I asked to step down in year 6 of it, invoking my wife again. She was sick of me working very long hours trying to build something from scratch. So I asked the dean to think about a succession process and a search, and got more autonomy for our search process than most departments are given. And we hired a terrific professor from University of Wisconsin-Madison, Rick Avermenko, who has taken over, but the model proved itself. Rick is a tenured full professor now at Arizona State University. I'm still a tenured full professor. I told him actually when he took the position, I was so delighted, and I was waiting for the moment when he would ask me to do some service job, and I would say, Rick, I'm a tenured full professor, no. And then I would say, what did you ask me? You know, he didn't laugh at that. But that's the control we have. We have a mission statement that came from 2016, written by a Harvard professor. The idea is that we can carry on this mission across generations of faculty because we hire younger faculty and we tenure them and bring them along. So these are shoots of hope. There are more of these civic thought and leadership departments, colleges, centers, I think, likely to come. In fact, the most recent topic is for one or more to be thinking about starting a PhD program. We have an undergraduate degree at Arizona State University. We also have an MA degree. But to have a PhD is a topic because there are fewer and fewer history departments, political science departments, other related fields, philosophy, let's say, around the country that educate young scholars to earn the PhD in the subjects of civic thought and constitutional thought and leadership that we need for these new departments. The missions, we came up with 3 of them at Arizona State University, and this is more or less the case across all of these colleges, departments, centers in the civic thought and leadership reform movement. First, to have an excellent academic department with degrees and courses and a couple of them a master's degree, to renew this nexus, this healthy, productive tension between a classical liberal arts education and an American civic education. Think of the education that was needed to produce the first draft of the Declaration of Independence, and then for Congress to debate it, right? That kind of education. And an American civic education from the, understanding America from the 17th century forward. I'll talk about this a little bit later. It's an education, in my terminology, in civic and constitutional knowledge and in civic virtues for citizens of a democratic republic, in this case, focally the American constitutional democratic republic. Second mission, civic discourse programming, speakers program. Having an intellectual diversity of speakers across a fall semester and a spring semester in a given year, having some events that are dialogue events, to set a model for the students and faculty in one of these departments or colleges to say, we're going to walk the walk outside the classroom as part of this university community, as well as inside the classroom. Socratic teaching, discussion, thinking, writing, talking inside the coursework, and then for the university campus and the community beyond. So we established the Civic Discourse Project right away, got Arizona PBS to be our partner to record everything, high quality video archive on their website and on our website. So the Civic Discourse mission, and then to have our own, the third mission to support K-12, the renewal, the revival of civic and history education in K-12. So our PhD faculty, mostly in political science, history, philosophy, law, some related fields, not to just push it off to the teacher's college or the education school, but to have subject matter experts helping teachers with professional development workshops, helping schools and school districts with curriculum, helping states with their state standards, and implementing and enforcing state standards. Another happy note, Stanford University, independently of this public school movement, but basically at the same time, or shortly after we got started in 2016, classics professor there, Josh Ober, started the Stanford Civics Initiative. Not disconnected from and unrelated to the James Madison program at Princeton University. There was some relationship and generating of ideas there. So there's a good news story happening at Stanford, at Johns Hopkins over here on the East Coast, and maybe even something happening at Harvard. So at Stanford, the Hoover Institution at Stanford University, working with professors and deans, started the Stanford Civics Initiative, with the ultimate ambition of changing the undergraduate curriculum. And that worked after a couple of years. So currently, this is how academic politics works. Currently, 2/3 of the new students at Stanford, not all of the new first-year students at Stanford, but 2/3 of them take a course entitled Citizenship in the 21st Century. It's got a pretty good syllabus to it. They start, I'll bring up my prop, my pocket constitution. The course, pretty soon, early in the course, they read the Declaration of Independence. It's not a perfect syllabus because they don't discover there's something called the Constitution until later in the course. They think there are these things called amendments to the Constitution. Amendments to what? But anyway, but it's semi-miraculous that it's there, and they're hoping to put it up for a vote at Stanford that in the fall they would put it up for a vote in the University Senate that all the first-year students at Stanford would be required to take citizenship in the 21st century. At Johns Hopkins, the president there, a Canadian immigrant and a lawyer named Ronald Daniels, published a book with 2 co-authors in 2021 entitled What Universities Owe Democracy. And he is a brave fellow, and he has walked the walk since then, since 2021. The answer to the question, the implicit question in the title, the answer that he and his co-authors give is every university and college in the United States of America owes America a civic education provided to all the students and the graduates. It's pretty clear he's not a dumb guy. He knew when he wrote the book that most faculty in most colleges and universities strongly disagree with that, and they don't care what some stupid president thinks about it, right? This is our college or our university, public or private. The faculty controls the curriculum, and the faculty had decided over decades, not important, even bad, any traditional conception of civic education. He knew that. He writes about it in the book. But he has walked the walk since then, established an Agora Institute, the Greek word for the sort of the convening space of the Athenian democracy in the classical world. The Agora Institute has worked from within the faculty and worked with deans and others to establish now it started this year, the new students, the first-year students at Johns Hopkins, during the course of their 4 years, no matter what they pick as a major, and most of them pick majors basically in STEM, to include pre-health. Sometime in their 4 years, they must complete a 3-credit course in democracy and civics. It's a basket of courses. It's not the perfect model, but it's, boy, better than nothing. At Harvard, I'll just say briefly, that things are so bad in higher education, so bad at Harvard, the chair of the government department contacted myself and a friend of the Jack Miller Center, who's a Jenna Story at AEI, contacted us and said, what is this I'm reading about in the national press about civic thought? What is this civic thought thing? And maybe, could we have some discussion about how to introduce that at Harvard? Because it's been eliminated from Harvard, basically. The American Political Science Association, of which I've been a member since I was a doctoral student, so over 30 years, has always talked about anything related to what I would call civic education in terms of civic engagement, civic participation, civic activism, thinly veiled, civic agency, but not education, as if this is not a knowledge thing. The knowledge part is easy and we all know what it is. And let's just get stuff done and motivate college, university students to get things done. And a year ago, they decided they should have, but it started with an earlier president of the association, so it goes back a couple of years, that they should have a standing committee on civic education. There was a knowledge component that the association had not been addressing. And they invited 2 constitutional conservatives, myself and another friend of the Jack Miller Center, Jim Stoner of Louisiana State University. They invited 2 known kind of constitutional conservatives to be on a committee. We're outnumbered by the folks who believe more in civic engagement and civic participation, but we're getting along so far. At least they haven't blocked my email address yet. And we're working on a mission statement, which I want to use the word patriotism. They don't know that yet. I'm working on a draft. But that's improvement, given where the APSA has been for 50 years or so. There's a new national network of professors started by this troublemaker at Stanford, Josh Ober, called the Alliance for Civics in the Academy. As if you can put those words together, civics and academy, higher education. And all comers are welcome. It started with a smaller membership group until we had a mission statement, and now we're nominating people to join who can agree to that mission statement about citizenship education for a democratic republic. We can't quite bring ourselves to use the word American yet, but it's a national consensus effort that we're making here. Some people are still uncomfortable with the word American, but we'll can't use the word patriotism either in that mission statement, but we'll get there. So, the Hoover Institution has been invited in by deans and provosts at Stanford University to play a role in the Stanford Civics Initiative and the Hoover Institution. If you look up Alliance for Civics in the Academy and find it on the website is hosted by the Hoover Institution. The web page, the homepage. Hoover has stood up a new center for revitalizing American institutions. And I'm hoping they will partner with the Jack Miller Center and Founding Forward and all kinds of other institutions across the country for higher ed and for K-12 in revitalizing civics education. They are partnering next month with iCivics, which was the umbrella organization that organized the 2021 study for K-12 civics, Educating for American Democracy. iCivics, based up in Cambridge, Massachusetts, partnering with the Hoover Institution. So iCivics thinks of itself as centrist. Hoover is obviously center-right, but they're partnering for sponsoring the main national conference on National Civics Week. I just mentioned the Department of Defense workshop that I was at earlier this week, civic education as a national security topic, a national security vulnerability, the poor state of civics education. The former Woodrow Wilson Institute, now called the Institute for Citizens and Scholars, has started an effort with college and university presidents called Presidents for Civic Preparedness. It's not as robust as I would like. They're not really talking about changing curriculum, hiring different kinds of faculty who have expertise in American civic and constitutional historical knowledge, but it's something. And they emphasize civic discourse and civil disagreement and free speech and things like that. The AAC&U acronym is the American Association of Colleges and Universities. They've started a civic education project, and they're using the word education, not just civic engagement, although there's a lot of civic engagement talk as well. And there's some other kind of civil discourse and even free speech initiatives popping up at different universities and colleges, private and public. So these are green shoots popping up. My own view is that unless there's a biting of the bullet and a discussion of the elephant in the room, what do we do in terms of curriculum? What do we do at this college or university in terms of required curriculum? What do we do in terms of the intellectual diversity of our faculty, which doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have an affirmative action program for conservatives. Do you have an expert on your faculty in the American founding period, in the origins of America as a democratic republic, in the history department, in the political science department, and some other department? In many colleges and universities, the more elite, the more this is true. There are not anymore faculty, not a single one on the faculty. And many of them are the institutions that produce PhD professors new professors in political science and history. So, on Tocqueville and the idea of reflective patriotism, to give some meat to this idea of civic knowledge and civic virtues for an American civic education to understand being a citizen, an aspiring citizen of our constitutional democratic republic. One of my efforts in the Educating for American Democracy study, and by the way, there's a sign of hope right there. Danielle Allen at Harvard, pretty clearly a center-left scholar, and people she'd already contacted to apply for the national grant to undertake this study, this report on K-12 civics. Peter Levine at Tufts and other. They reached out to me knowing I was a conservative, knowing I was out at a public university in flyover country in Arizona. They wanted me at the table, and then they allowed me to invite some other pretty serious intellectually conservative scholars, Ellen Gelzo, the great Lincoln scholar, my friend Jim Stoner, David Bobb, head of the Bill of Rights Institute, Chester Finn, who's worked on K-12 history and civics education for a long time. They let us sit at the table. One of my interventions was to use the word American in the title of the study instead of Educating for Democracy, as if like Mars, where? Educating for American Democracy, and to have this phrase from Alexis de Tocqueville, Democracy in America, use the P word, patriotism, as at least a question that should be put in front of students in K-12 education, a reflective or considered patriotism. So that's in the report, in the opening and closing paragraphs of the sort of report that's the preview for the guidelines that we developed about K through 12 civics and history education. It's in the opening and closing paragraphs of that report, because there was great concern as we were finishing writing the report in 2020, that contentious election, and in 2021, as President Biden was taking office, great concern about polarization and anger and violence, partly because of the George Floyd incident in that summer, and then national electoral politics. So reflective patriotism was one of the 3 civic virtues. Got my colleagues to use that phrase, civic virtues, that should be a focus of a K-12 civics education. Civil disagreement in public political civic debate. Free people will always disagree about everything. That's how America arose. It's certainly how 1776 happened, 1787, 1791, the Bill of Rights. So civil disagreement, civic friendship across diverse views, and one of those views would be religious or not religious, or pluralism about religious topics. What does the laws of nature and nature's God mean in the Declaration of Independence, right? But many other kinds of pluralism that we have. So civil disagreement, civic friendship, reflective patriotism, considered, rational, informed, argumentative patriotism about America. So this was a phrase that I told the group. It came from Alexis de Tocqueville, Democracy in America, this extraordinary work that he writes. This is the cover of a new edition translation by Harvey Mansfield and Delba Winthrop, husband and wife, professors at Harvard. It came out about 20 years ago. And in the introduction to it, the preface to it, these two, Mansfield and Winthrop, refer to it as the greatest book ever written on democracy and the greatest book ever written on America. And it was 170 years at that point after Tocqueville had written it. So it's a work of political philosophy, but also we would call it political sociology. He's proud of the facts that he gathered here in the United States on a 9-month tour, covered a lot of ground. And early in the first volume, he offers the argument that there's a new kind of patriotism in the New World. He comes from the Old World, minor French aristocracy. It's after the French Revolution, but still sort of minor nobility. In the Old World, we have a patriotism of affection and sentiment. We have love of the motherland, the fatherland, the king, the queen, mythic history, blood and soil in the uglier version. But it's mostly emotional and sentimental. In America, in the New World, says Tocqueville, the Americans have emotional elements and gratitude for America, but they have a rational element, because America comes from ideas, and they're free people, and they know they're free people, and they want to argue. They want to test out the government, test out themselves. They want to argue with the government, and then argue with each other. They want to rationally consider, is this working out for me and my family and our community, et cetera. So it's both the heart and the head. And local self-government, he argues from the first time he uses this phrase, reflective self-patriotism, local self-government, most political activity in 1830 is happening at the local level. Townships, counties, then the state, and a clearly minority quota of that political activity is national. Self-government teaches a rational, reflective patriotism, that you're pulled into some kind of service. It happens, he says, in civil society, especially emphasizes this in the second volume, happens in civil society like, Freedom's Foundation, Valley Forge, and like the Union League, and now Founding Forward. But it also happens in the practice of local self-government. He emphasizes the Christian point of departure of America. The Americans have 2 foundings, in effect. He doesn't put it quite this way, but the American founding, that's the first founding, is the Puritans. People seeking religious and political liberty simultaneously from the Old World to the New World. He says that's the predominant spirit of America. He deals later with the very different spirit that's in the South, the spirit of slavery, complicating the story of America. But his main view is that the spirit of liberty and the spirit of America is the founding genius of America. Nowhere else in the world and in human history do we have a political community founding and forging itself by reconciling these two things which everywhere else in the world do not go together throughout all of human history. Right? Even after the political founding, the second founding, so to speak, 1776, 1787, 1791, the Bill of Rights, even after that, he says, religion in this understanding, largely biblical, largely Christian, largely Protestant, religion is still the first political institution of the Americans because it teaches these various mores, could be translated civic virtues. But these are in civil society and sort of private life, private sector, as well as in public civic life. Again, liberty with equality of all persons, equal natural rights, ideas about virtue needed in individuals and in public life, and there are ideas of right and of justice and of wrong and of evil. There's a common good to this political community. There are shared beliefs, and there's hope. If things are bad, we might see them getting better, especially if we make some effort to bring about a better condition. All of these come from the Christian political, theological, philosophical tradition, he says. A further element of a reflective patriotism in the Americans, and this is moving now throughout the first volume, the 2 volumes of Democracy in America in that translation from Mansfield Winthrop, it's over 600 pages. He discovers there's a kind of American exceptionalism that the common person will tell you about, because if you as a foreigner criticize America in some way, even to pass on somebody else's criticism, you hear about it. The Americans get in your face. We don't like that. Right? We're very proud that we're the first place in the world to put together religious liberty and political liberty and in the New World in this great project. So there's a kind of testy pride that the Americans have about America. As he moves on into the second volume, he comes up with a phrase, interest, rational interest, well understood, and often translated enlightened self-interest. This is not a self-understanding of patriotism that's a virtue. It's what am I getting out of being patriotic and being self-governing in America? It's more calculated. He says right away he has his doubts about it, but this is how many Americans talk about serving and participating in civil society, private associations, religious, whatever, or in public life, public service in some way. They talk about it as if, well, you know, I'm doing this because it's actually good for my family and good for me and it's good for the community, and, you know, what goes around comes around. Something like that. He thinks, in fact, the Americans are more magnanimous and more charitable than that. But it's interesting that this is how they often want to phrase it. This is very rational, my investment in civic life and some kind of public service. He finally gets around to talking about formal schooling. He has some mentions of schooling earlier. And we know that he thought about writing a chapter on schooling. He decided not to. So one of the things that we emphasize, public schooling, private schooling, formal schooling, university schooling. He does talk about the liberal arts spirit that is important. And especially studying the Greek and Roman classics will always be important in a democratic republic to have that intellectual foundation. But he doesn't place great emphasis on it, and he does say that the formal schooling is supplemented by a civic, political culture in which there's great literature that talks about being free, and a broader elements of civic culture, of patriotic public spirit. So now, in closing, how are we doing on all these? The phrases in red, to go back, are the phrases where I think America is not in great shape. 175, 180 years later. The religious elements, the local government, the activity of self-government, ideas of civic virtues, a sense of pride in America and exceptionalism, being proud of being magnanimous and charitable. I'm not saying that doesn't exist, but and certainly liberal arts education in higher education and percolating down through K-12. So not to end on a completely depressing note, This is the webpage of the National Commission for Commemorating America at 250, established by President Obama and by the Congress at that time. I ask you, you came out tonight and not just to hear some boring professor. You came out because you had hope that it might possibly be interesting. I ask this kind of audience, I'm going to preach to the choir. I ask you to pledge to think about America 250, 2026 as the beginning of a 15-year period, 15 years, through commemorating 1791, the Bill of Rights. Being a George Washington fan, I might ask it to extend to 1796, the Farewell Address, one of the hinge moments in human history. This powerful, powerful man who wants to resign. And my little tiny experience of this, having been the founding director of a school, building it from scratch, after 6 years, you couldn't ask me to serve a full 7th year and an 8th year. I need you, gotta get out of there. So I always thought he was being somewhat canny. You know, oh, I want to retire. Oh, I don't want power. You know, and Gary Wills writes about this. It's very Machiavellian of him. I always doubted that, but I thought about it. But after being just a tiny taste of what he did, I thought, oh, he wants to get out of there. He wants to get the hell out of there and go back to Mount Vernon, right? But it's still to be that powerful and that proud and that accomplished and say it's the principled thing to do to get out of here and to resign. Most warlords who are victorious generals and warlords do not. So maybe we should commemorate through 1796, and that means 2046. That means a 20-year commemoration period. If we can keep this up, the green shoots that are happening in K-12 and in higher education, with these marvelous private associations, some awareness in state governments and in federal government, then we can have hope, because we can't really have optimism right now. So if you think back to 1776, in Jefferson's first draft, he finishes by saying, we mutually pledge for these principles, we mutually pledge our lives, our fortunes, our sacred honor. It's a matter of honor about these principles of liberty and equality and self-government. So can we rally ourselves to that? The path to 1776 is a path of argument and of trying to build out through debate a stronger middle ground. Not the loyalist view, as it ends up calling, not the view that says we've got to continue trying to petition and try and get the king to hear us out, and the view that says, well, maybe I believe in this, but we're not going to fight about it, right? The spirit of George Washington showing up in his uniform, but also wanting to argue and debate and build out a middle and then forge a consensus. Can we recover that? It's not mythical. Richard Brookhiser, in his wonderful biography of George Washington from 1996, says the amazing thing about George Washington, he's not a myth. He's not some kind of unicorn. This is a real person and a very proud person, right? He did this. He committed to these things, and so did other founders. So we can take inspiration from that. And these other civic exemplars, in the pocket constitution, I'll finish. This is an educational idea we had at Skedal at ASU, to supplement the Declaration and the Constitution with 2 other documents just as markers for the continuing debate and argument. It's kind of Socratic pocket constitution, a reflective patriotic pocket constitution. We could have put in Elizabeth Cady Stanton and the Seneca Falls Declaration about rights, equal rights for women, political rights for women, or Frederick Douglass, or Susan B. Anthony, or others, right? So this is what we should undertake, at least 15 years of commemorating gratefully, with pride, our political founding, the origins and sources of it, and the idea of keeping the republic, because it will not keep itself. Thank you.
Paul, thank you. Thank you so much. We have time for a couple of questions. If you just put your hand up. Over here, Laura.
Paul, first of all, thank you. You have been on the bleeding edge, and I'm sure that has been very lonely at times. To my friends in the room, if you were shocked with what you heard, join the fight, because that's what Founding Forward is about. And my question, because I have to have a question mark,
You got one more sentence, Jeff.
What advice would you give Founding Forward? How can we play in this arena to be the most impactful to help your cause?
Thank you. I don't know the full catalog of things you're doing. I have some awareness, and it's been great to get to know John in the past couple of years. My basic idea was what you may have thought of as the realm of the possible, go beyond it. Do what you're doing and do more of it, and be risky. Think of partnerships you didn't think of before. Think of a scale of activity that you hadn't thought of before, because it's not a good situation out there. So I didn't, at the DOD, we were talking earlier this week, I brought up the polling that was done after Putin invaded Ukraine in 2022. And Quinnipiac, a respected national pollster, did a national poll, their social scientific view of what a national sample is. Attitudes about that war and that conflict. And clever enough to pose the question. It was clear, it was 6 weeks or so after the invasion, that the Ukrainians were not folding. And so someone was clever enough to put in there a question to Americans. What would you do if the United States was invaded? Would you stay and fight, or would you flee? It's basically those words. A bare majority said they would stay and fight. Under 35, guess what? Okay, and if you ask about patriotism or how important is it to live in a democracy, or phrases like not using my strange archaic language about, constitutional republic or something, using the common term now, democracy, right? Under 35, under 30, America is underwater, democracy is underwater, the importance of living in a free, self-governing democratic republic. Any kind of gratitude for America, underwater. So I say go big or go home at this point. And you'll make some mistakes. I don't think you will make a lot of them. I think you ought to go for it.
I'm standing in front of our strategic planning chair, and that is basically the big plan, is to go big. So thank you, Paul, and thank you, Jeff. Question back here, Kier.
All right, Paul. Hey, love the talk. The question I have, if you were not only Secretary of Education, but like Minister of Education with carte blanche to wide sweeping reforms, what would be your priorities?
Kill all the lawyers. No, I just let that down. Sorry, my daughter's a lawyer. My daughter's at bar in the state of Colorado. That's a great line from Shakespeare.
It plays.
Shakespeare and civic education, very important. It's a real challenge of our federalism that state and local governments, as well as private organizations and institutions, are supposed to take the lead on education. My hero, George Washington, and his lieutenant, Alexander Hamilton, and other founders, Benjamin Rush, they wanted a national university. I think it was a mistake not to found a national university for a new national constitutional democratic republic. But we didn't. We've had private universities since Harvard, public universities, 1789, University of North Carolina, and the famous one on this topic, Jefferson and Madison, collaborating to found the University of Virginia for civic education. Civic education is gone at University of Virginia. It is gone. The one last professor is just retiring, Jim Caesar. And the political science department, they couldn't get him out the door fast enough. Wouldn't let him hire anybody to replace him, even with private money to replace him. They wouldn't let him hire anybody to replace him. And anybody who would teach Jefferson's and Madison's thoughts on the American founding and on civic education, not welcome. Okay. So it is a great challenge to have a federal minister of education dictate what should happen. It's tempting. Given that there is a Department of Education and there is a Department of Defense, there are some things that could be done, I think, that wouldn't violate the principle of federalism, given that we do have these entities, but you want to be really careful about it coming from that central authority.
Laura, I think there's a question right there.
Thank you. Wonderful talk. Just to reframe, I guess, these last two questions, outside of formal schooling, what advice do you have for parents?
Kill all the smartphones. My wife is really bothered by the fact that it's right near she says right near your heart, right? You love that thing more than you love me, right? Fortunately, our children are 28 and 30. The daughter, who's a lawyer, is 30. They didn't quite get as affected by it because the smartphone, with all of its capabilities and enticing, enchanting, demonizing capabilities, it wasn't really around by the time they graduated high school. But the students coming along into high school and colleges and universities, when they should be somewhat interested in a civics, citizenship education, including the historical dimension of it, their brains have been shaped to think in very short, tiny bites and in very shallow ways. So it takes a real effort from families and communities and schools early on to say, okay, these things are a reality, but boy, limit the access to them and limit the access to the digital space. So you have a chance to be formed first by other ways of thinking and knowing and learning and looking people in the eye. It's one reason we continue with the Civic Discourse Project at ASU, to get people out physically with each other and to hear a lecture, hear a speaker, and to have a reception beforehand and a reception afterward. We have a small dinner afterward so the speaker and other people can talk with each other. Those kinds of face-to-face physical things. So Jonathan Haidt has written the book literally on this in the past year, and I'm pretty sympathetic to his view. But I grew up in upstate New York using chainsaws and wandering around and walking around. My parents didn't really know where we were, and I was being a boy.
Jason.
So I'm just wondering, in the face of a shift away from collectivism and more towards an individual mindset, how should we change civics education? How do we get people engaged with something that's so collectivist?
The Latin root of this word, which is an American neologism as far as I know, civics. It's a 19th century invented word by an American minister. And he founds then, what does he call this? The Association of American Civics, I got to remember. New York minister, Catholic, so I have to say, Protestant, he did a good thing. Coins this word, so it's got a Latin root and a Greek suffix, like physics. He invented civics, right? The study of the civ, of the civ, the civic community, the political community, the civitas in the Latin. And then the same root, Brookhiser makes this point in the Washington book, 1996 book. Same Latin root for civility in a human-to-human scale, personal. Civility, civic community, and civilization. Same Latin root. So there is a communal element here. It doesn't have to be a totalitarian thing. In fact, it defeats the purpose of it if it's remind me the word you used about it. What was the?
I think it was collectivist.
Collectivist, right? A negative, right? It can be, but then it's obviously, Vladimir Putin can do a great job at civic education, and he does. That's why he's hanging on, right? But it's not civic education. It's not a real civic community. So there is a tension, and the EAD report, 2021. Danielle Allen's idea was to introduce what we would, as educators, call tensions that are productive tensions, but they're also never going to go away in thinking about citizenship education, civics and history education. And these are features, not bugs. And one of them that we came up with is the tension between a reflective patriotism and civic honesty. So the 1619 Project is on the cynicism side about America. We think a healthier version of that is civic honesty. What's the accurate story about American history? The paragraphs in the Declaration, the draft that Jefferson wrote condemning the slave trade as a violation of natural rights, those were struck out. That's the truth, right? But a reflective patriotism is, aren't you grateful that there was the Declaration of Independence? Are you grateful there was America? And then watch in that pocket Constitution, right? From 1863 to 1963, Martin Luther King praises the magnificent words of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, and praises the architects of our republic, while demanding equal civil natural rights under the principles of the Declaration and the Constitution and the amendments to the Constitution. So.
One more question.
Our founding fathers acknowledged I'm right here. Our founding fathers acknowledged the importance of the creator and the founding of our country. George Washington being one of the most prevalent writers of that. He, in fact, placed the Bible at the cornerstone of the Washington Monument as it was being built. In light of the recent numbers that the Pew Institute came out with, as 29% of young people or adults not believing in the creator,
Yeah.
do you feel as though, in your opinion, the decline of civics education is a reflection of the lack of belief in the creator in our society?
It's a great question. Washington wants to include a paragraph on religion in the farewell address. So he and Hamilton going back and forth on writing drafts, and then another New Yorker, John Jay, gets involved at the very end, at Washington's insistence. But Washington had been invoking a divinity as soon as he was a public figure as a general, and then in retirement, and then as president. So it's the generic, so to speak, language about a divinity that, and I think Washington's reasoning is there's sectarianism among Protestants, and then Protestant Catholic, and then Jewish, and then other religious beliefs. So the scholarly term for this is denominationalism. Americans invent denominationalism, a civic view of religion, which we understand there's religious pluralism, and everybody has a natural right to their own views about whether there is a single divinity, are there any divinities at all? There's none, right? And these beautiful, famous letters that he writes to Catholics, to Baptists, to two Jewish congregations about the natural right to religious liberty. That's why we fought this revolution. That's what this new Constitution is about. On the other hand, it was, implicitly that included people who were not theists at all, atheists, anti-theists, as part of that package of natural rights. I will say that Robert Putnam, who many of us would know, at least the phrase, is his book from more than 20 years ago, Bowling Alone, right? Decline of civil society, decline of healthy civic participation or civil society. The sequel book with a Notre Dame professor was called American Grace. He was worried that one cause of the health of private civil associations like this and a healthy civil society was a decline in metaphysical belief, theistic belief. So it's certainly, as a historical topic, it ought to be addressed. And if you don't think the Declaration of Independence, if you don't think it should have included the laws of nature, nature's God, and references to divinity, what replaces that as the basis for equal natural rights? What's the ultimate foundation? To have that under discussion and have that argument. So the history of it, and in a way the philosophy of it, and then the sociological reality of it. But anyway, that would take that would be another.
We'll have you back for that one,
Yeah.
Paul. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, Paul Carrese.
Thank you very much.
Hold on.
As a gift to John, a pocket constitution.
Oh, yeah, we don't have any of those around here. Thank you, Paul.
This is the best one.
It has your edits? Yeah. If you would, please take a picture of our QR code. You'll get an email tomorrow. We want to know what you think about this program and ideas for others. Please help us in that way. And CLE credit for our lawyers. We really do like lawyers here. Over here next to Jason, feel free, if you are a lawyer, to get your CLE credit. We'll see you on Monday at our next program. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you very much.